The police officer looked me straight in the eye and said, "Ma'am, we need you to step outside and explain why you are trespassing on this property." I stood there in my own family cabin, wearing my grandmother's apron, holding the deed that had been in our family for 3 generations. My coffee was still warm on the kitchen counter. The morning sun was streaming through windows that I had cleaned just hours before. Behind the officer stood Karen, our self-appointed neighborhood enforcer, with her arms crossed and a satisfied smirk on her face. She had finally done it. She had finally found a way to get rid of me. But what Karen did not know, what she had never bothered to check, was that this was not just my family's cabin. This was my property. I was not a guest. I was not a visitor. I was the owner. And that is when everything changed. For 43 years, our family has gathered at the lake cabin every summer. It sits on the edge of Crystal Lake, surrounded by towering pine trees that have watched over 3 generations of barbecues, fishing trips, and lazy afternoons on the dock. My grandmother bought this place back in 1981 with money she saved from working double shifts at the textile factory. She wanted a place where her family could escape the city heat and create memories that would last forever. She succeeded beyond her wildest dreams. The cabin itself is nothing fancy. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a living room that opens up to a kitchen where we have cooked thousands of meals together. The wooden floors creak in all the right places, and the screen door still slams shut with the same satisfying bang that it has made for decades. But it was never about the building. It was about the tradition. Every June, my siblings and I would pack up our families and descend on the lake like a small army of relaxation. The kids would spend their days swimming and catching fireflies while the adults would sit on the porch, sharing stories and watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and crimson. My niece Emma had always been the star of these gatherings. Even as a little girl, she would organize elaborate treasure hunts for her younger cousins and lead expeditions to find the perfect skipping stones. She grew up to become a successful attorney in Chicago, but she never lost her love for the lake. When grandmother passed away 2 years ago, she left the cabin to Emma. It made perfect sense. Emma had always been the one who cared for the property, who made sure the winterizing was done properly, who handled the repairs and maintenance. She had earned it. The transition was seamless. Emma took over the family gatherings with the same warmth and enthusiasm that grandmother had shown. She added her own touches: solar lights along the dock, a new fire pit for evening gatherings, and a small garden where she grew tomatoes and herbs. But then things started to change in our quiet lakeside community. About a year ago, some of the newer residents decided that our little slice of paradise needed more structure. They formed a homeowners association, complete with rules and regulations that none of us had ever needed before. At first, it seemed harmless enough. They wanted to organize a community cleanup day and maybe coordinate some holiday decorations. But as the months passed, the HOA began to flex its muscles. Suddenly, there were restrictions on boat sizes, limits on guest parking, and requirements for landscaping approval. The relaxed atmosphere that had drawn us all to the lake in the first place was slowly being replaced by bureaucratic nonsense. The woman leading this charge was someone I had never paid much attention to before. She lived in one of the newer houses about half a mile down the shore. I had seen her walking her small dog in the evenings, always carrying a clipboard and taking notes on something. She seemed harmless enough. But as I would soon learn, appearances can be very deceiving. The first sign of trouble came during our 4th of July gathering. Emma had invited about 20 family members for the weekend, just like we had done every year for decades. We were having our traditional barbecue on the dock when this woman appeared at the edge of our property. She introduced herself as the HOA compliance officer and informed us that we were violating the new guest policy. Apparently, we were only allowed to have 6 visitors at a time, and we needed to register any overnight guests 48 hours in advance. Emma handled it with her typical grace and professionalism. She politely explained that this was a family gathering and that we had been doing this for decades without any problems. The woman just smiled and said that times were changing and that everyone needed to follow the new rules. That should have been my first warning that we were dealing with someone who would stop at nothing to impose her will on our community. Her name was Patricia, but everyone in the neighborhood had started calling her Karen behind her back. She had moved to the lake community about 3 years ago, buying one of the new McMansions that had been built on the far side of the water. Within months of her arrival, she had appointed herself as the unofficial watchdog of our peaceful community. Patricia was in her mid-50s, with short blonde hair that she kept perfectly styled and an extensive collection of pastel polo shirts. She drove a pristine white SUV that she parked at precise angles in her driveway. Everything about her screamed order and control. But it was her behavior that truly set her apart from the rest of us. She treated the neighborhood like her personal kingdom, patrolling the streets with the intensity of a military general inspecting troops. She carried a clipboard everywhere she went, documenting everything from the height of grass to the color of mailboxes. Her first victims were the Johnsons, an elderly couple who had been living on the lake for over 20 years. Patricia decided that their vegetable garden was too close to the property line and demanded that they move it. When they politely declined, she filed a formal complaint with the HOA and threatened to take legal action. Next, she targeted the Martinez family for having too many cars in their driveway. She measured the distance between vehicles and determined that they were creating a safety hazard. She left passive-aggressive notes on their windshields and eventually convinced the HOA to fine them for noncompliance. But her most aggressive campaign was against the Hendersons, a young couple with 3 small children. Patricia decided that their playground equipment was an eyesore and demanded that they remove it. When they refused, she began calling the county zoning office, claiming that the swing set violated building codes. The pattern was always the same. Patricia would identify what she considered to be a violation of her personal vision for the community. She would approach the homeowners with a false smile and a clipboard full of made-up rules. If they did not comply immediately, she would escalate to threats and formal complaints. What made her particularly dangerous was her complete lack of knowledge about actual property laws or HOA regulations. She would invent rules on the spot, claiming that she had the authority to enforce them. When people questioned her, she would become defensive and start throwing around legal-sounding terms that she clearly did not understand. Her obsession with our family cabin began shortly after the 4th of July incident. She started driving by our property multiple times a day, always slowing down to peer through the trees at our dock and cabin. She would take photos with her phone, documenting everything from the number of cars in our driveway to the laundry hanging on our clothesline. I started receiving letters from her almost weekly. She complained about our noise levels during family gatherings, even though we were always quiet after 9 p.m. She claimed that our boat was too large for our dock space, even though it was the same boat we had been using for 15 years. She even complained about the color of our cabin, saying that it did not match the aesthetic standards of the community. Emma tried to handle Patricia diplomatically at first. She would respond to her letters with polite explanations and offers to discuss any legitimate concerns. But Patricia was not interested in compromise or discussion. She wanted complete submission to her will. The situation escalated when Patricia convinced the HOA board to implement a new guest policy that was clearly designed to target our family gatherings. The policy limited the number of overnight guests to 4 people and required advance registration for any social events. It was ridiculous and unenforceable, but Patricia was determined to use it as a weapon against us. She began showing up at our family gatherings uninvited, clipboard in hand, counting heads and taking notes. She would stand at the edge of our property, just beyond our property line, watching us like a hawk watching mice. It was creepy and intimidating, but we tried to ignore her. But ignoring Patricia was like ignoring a cancer. She continued to grow more aggressive and more invasive with each passing week. She started questioning our visitors as they arrived, demanding to know who they were and how long they planned to stay. She even began following our family members when they went to the marina or the local grocery store. I knew that this situation was heading toward a confrontation. Patricia had made it clear that she would not stop until she had driven us away from our own property. But I never imagined that she would go as far as she eventually did. I should have seen it coming. All the signs were there. But sometimes you just do not want to believe that someone could be so vindictive and so completely wrong about everything. The confrontation happened on a Saturday morning in early September. Emma had driven up to the cabin alone for a quiet weekend of reading and relaxation. She had been working on a particularly difficult case at her law firm and needed some time to decompress away from the city. I was not there that weekend. I was visiting my other daughter in Portland. But Emma called me later that evening to tell me what had happened, and I could hear the anger and frustration in her voice. Emma had arrived at the cabin around 10 a.m. She parked her car in the driveway, grabbed her overnight bag and a box of groceries, and headed inside to start her weekend retreat. She had been looking forward to this moment for weeks. She spent the morning cleaning the cabin and preparing for a relaxing afternoon of reading on the dock. She made herself a cup of coffee, gathered her book and a blanket, and settled into her favorite chair overlooking the water. That was when Patricia appeared. Emma told me that she first noticed movement in her peripheral vision. She looked up from her book to see a woman in a bright pink polo shirt marching across the lawn toward the dock. Emma had never met Patricia face to face, but she had heard enough descriptions from other family members to know exactly who this was. Patricia approached the dock with the confidence of someone who believed she had caught a criminal in the act. She was carrying her ever-present clipboard and had her phone ready to record the encounter. "Excuse me," Patricia called out as she reached the edge of the dock. "I need to see some identification and proof that you have permission to be on this property." Emma looked up from her book with confusion. She had no idea who this woman was or why she was making demands on private property. "I am sorry," Emma replied calmly. "I think there might be some confusion. This is my family's cabin." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "I know for a fact that this property belongs to an elderly woman who does not live here full-time. You are clearly trespassing, and I am going to have to ask you to leave immediately." Emma felt her professional instincts kick in. As an attorney, she was accustomed to dealing with difficult people and false accusations. She took a deep breath and responded with the same calm professionalism that she used in court. "I am Emma Richardson, and this is my cabin. I inherited it from my grandmother 2 years ago. I have every right to be here." But Patricia was not interested in explanations. She had already decided that Emma was a trespasser, and nothing was going to change her mind. I do not care what story you are trying to tell me, Patricia said, her voice rising. I know that you do not belong here, and I am going to call the police if you do not leave this property immediately. Emma realized that she was dealing with someone who was not operating in the realm of logic or reason. She decided that the best course of action was to simply ignore Patricia and continue with her planned relaxation. I am not going anywhere, Emma said firmly. This is my property, and I am going to enjoy my weekend here. Patricia's face turned red with rage. She was not accustomed to being dismissed or ignored. In her mind, she was the authority in this community, and everyone was supposed to follow her orders. Fine, Patricia spat. If you want to do this the hard way, we will do it the hard way. I am calling the police right now, and when they get here, they are going to arrest you for trespassing. Emma watched as Patricia pulled out her phone and dialed 911. She could hear Patricia's voice, getting more and more dramatic as she spoke to the emergency dispatcher. Yes, I need police assistance immediately. There is a woman trespassing on private property at 1247 Lakeshore Drive. She is refusing to leave and becoming aggressive. I am concerned for my safety. Emma could not believe what she was hearing. Patricia was completely fabricating the situation, turning a simple property dispute into a potential criminal case. But Emma was not worried. She had her identification, her keys to the cabin, and plenty of documentation proving her ownership of the property. What Emma did not realize was that Patricia had been planning this moment for weeks. She had been waiting for the perfect opportunity to catch one of our family members alone at the cabin, without witnesses or backup. She thought she had found the perfect victim in Emma. But Patricia had made a critical error. She had assumed that Emma was just another family member visiting the cabin. She had no idea that Emma was not just a visitor or a guest. Emma was the owner. And that mistake was about to cost Patricia everything she thought she had built in our community. 20 minutes later, Emma heard the sound of car doors slamming in the driveway. She looked up from her book to see two police officers walking toward the cabin, with Patricia trailing behind them like a prosecuting attorney leading witnesses to the scene of a crime. Emma's heart sank. She had hoped that the police would see through Patricia's obvious fabrication and dismiss the complaint without even coming to the cabin. But here they were, ready to investigate what Patricia had described as a serious trespassing incident. Officer Martinez was a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a professional demeanor. Officer Johnson was younger, probably in his early 30s, with the eager attitude of someone who was still learning the ropes. Both officers looked like they would rather be anywhere else on this beautiful Saturday morning. Patricia led the charge, practically bouncing with excitement as she pointed toward the dock where Emma was sitting. There she is, Patricia announced dramatically. I caught her red-handed trespassing on this property. She has been here for hours and she refuses to leave. Officer Martinez looked at Emma and then back at Patricia. Ma'am, can you tell us exactly what happened here? Patricia launched into a detailed account of the morning's events, complete with exaggerated descriptions of Emma's aggressive behavior and threatening attitude. She painted herself as a concerned neighbor who was simply trying to protect the property of an absent homeowner. This woman claimed that she owns this cabin, Patricia said with a dismissive laugh. But I know for a fact that this property belongs to an elderly woman who does not live here. This person is clearly lying and trying to take advantage of the situation. Officer Martinez nodded politely and then turned to Emma. Ma'am, can you tell us your side of the story? Emma stood up from her chair and walked toward the officers with the calm confidence that had served her well in courtrooms across Chicago. She had dealt with hostile witnesses and aggressive opposing counsel, but she had never had to defend her right to exist on her own property. "My name is Emma Richardson," she said, reaching into her purse for her wallet. "This is my cabin. I inherited it from my grandmother, Dorothy Richardson, about 2 years ago. I have identification and documentation proving my ownership." She handed her driver's license to Officer Martinez and then pulled out her keys to the cabin. "I also have the keys to the property and can provide you with copies of the deed and insurance documents if necessary." Officer Martinez examined Emma's identification carefully. The address on her driver's license was in Chicago, but that was not unusual for a vacation property. He looked at the keys in her hand and then at Patricia, who was standing behind him with her arms crossed and a skeptical expression on her face. "Are you saying that you own this property?" Officer Martinez asked Emma. "Yes, I am the legal owner of this cabin and the surrounding property," Emma replied firmly. "I have all the documentation to prove it." Patricia could not contain herself any longer. "That is impossible," she burst out. "I know for a fact that this property belongs to Dorothy Richardson, and she is an elderly woman who lives in town. This person is obviously lying." Officer Johnson looked confused. "Ma'am, did you say the property belongs to Dorothy Richardson?" "Yes," Patricia replied triumphantly. "Dorothy Richardson has owned this cabin for decades. This woman is clearly not Dorothy Richardson." Emma felt a moment of satisfaction as she realized that Patricia had just revealed the depth of her ignorance about the property ownership situation. "You are absolutely right," Emma said calmly. "Dorothy Richardson did own this cabin for decades. She was my grandmother. When she passed away 2 years ago, she left the cabin to me in her will. I am now the legal owner of this property." The expression on Patricia's face was priceless. Emma could see the exact moment when Patricia realized that her carefully constructed narrative was beginning to crumble. Officer Martinez looked at Patricia with a mixture of confusion and growing irritation. "Ma'am, did you verify the current ownership of this property before you called us?" Patricia stammered for a moment, trying to come up with an explanation that would salvage her position. "Well, I mean, I knew that Dorothy Richardson owned the property, and I have never seen this woman before, so I naturally assumed." "You assumed," Officer Johnson interrupted, "but you did not actually check the current ownership records." Patricia's face was turning red again, but this time it was from embarrassment rather than anger. She was beginning to realize that she had made a serious mistake. But Patricia was not the type of person to admit defeat easily. She was going to fight this battle to the bitter end, even if it meant making herself look foolish in the process. "I still think we need to verify her story," Patricia said desperately. "Just because she has keys and identification does not mean she actually owns the property. She could have stolen those things." Officer Martinez looked at Emma with an expression that suggested he was starting to understand what they were really dealing with here. This was not a simple trespassing case. This was a neighborhood dispute that had gotten completely out of hand. Officer Martinez had been a police officer for 15 years, and he had developed a pretty good sense for when someone was wasting his time. The more he listened to Patricia's increasingly desperate explanations, the more convinced he became that this was not a legitimate trespassing case. "Ma'am," he said to Emma, "do you have any additional documentation that can prove your ownership of this property?" Emma nodded. "I have copies of the deed, the will, and the insurance documents inside the cabin. Would you like me to get them for you? That would be helpful, Officer Martinez replied. He turned to Patricia. Ma'am, while she is getting those documents, can you tell me exactly what evidence you have that this woman does not belong here? Patricia realized that she was in trouble. She had called the police based on nothing more than her assumption that Emma was a stranger. She had no evidence of any wrongdoing, no proof that Emma was trespassing, and no documentation to support her claims. Well, I have never seen her before, Patricia said weakly, and I know all the regular visitors to this property. Officer Johnson looked skeptical. How well do you know the Richardson family? Patricia hesitated. The truth was that she had never actually met any of the Richardson family members. She had observed them from a distance during their gatherings, but she had never introduced herself or attempted to learn their names. I have seen them around the neighborhood, Patricia admitted, but I have never actually met them personally. Officer Martinez nodded. So you called the police to report a trespassing incident involving a woman you had never met, on a property owned by a family you had never actually spoken to. Patricia could see that the officers were losing patience with her. She decided to try a different approach. Look, I am just trying to protect the community, she said. We have had problems with break-ins and vandalism in the past, and I thought this woman might be involved in something suspicious. Officer Johnson looked around the peaceful lakeside property. What exactly did you observe that seemed suspicious? Patricia struggled to come up with an answer. The truth was that Emma had been doing nothing more than reading a book on the dock. There was nothing suspicious about her behavior at all. She was just sitting there, Patricia said lamely, and she refused to leave when I told her to. Officer Martinez was beginning to understand the full scope of the situation. This was not a trespassing case. This was a case of harassment and false reporting. Emma returned from the cabin with a folder full of documents. She handed copies of the deed, the will, and the insurance paperwork to Officer Martinez. Here is the deed showing the transfer of ownership from Dorothy Richardson to Emma Richardson, she said. Here is a copy of my grandmother's will, and here are the current insurance documents showing me as the policy holder. Officer Martinez examined the documents carefully. Everything was in order. The deed was properly notarized and filed with the county. The will was executed according to state law. The insurance documents were current and showed Emma as the property owner. These documents appear to be legitimate, Officer Martinez said. Ms. Richardson, you are clearly the legal owner of this property. Patricia watched in horror as her case completely collapsed. She had been so certain that she was right, so convinced that she had caught a criminal in the act. Now she was faced with the reality that she had wasted police time and resources on a completely fabricated complaint. But Patricia was not ready to give up. She was going to fight this battle until the very end. I still think something is not right here, she said desperately. Maybe those documents are fake. Maybe she is part of some kind of elaborate scam. Officer Johnson looked at Patricia with growing irritation. Ma'am, are you seriously suggesting that this woman created fake legal documents and somehow obtained keys to this property as part of an elaborate trespassing scheme? Patricia realized how ridiculous she sounded, but she was too deep into her delusion to back down now. I am just saying that we should be thorough, she said. We should check with the county records office to verify these documents. Officer Martinez had heard enough. He pulled out his radio and called the dispatch center. This is Unit 247. Can you patch me through to the county records office? I need to verify some property ownership information. While they waited for the call back, Emma looked at Patricia with a mixture of pity and anger. She could see that Patricia was a woman who had become so obsessed with control that she had lost touch with reality. "You know," Emma said quietly, "you could have simply introduced yourself and asked who I was. This entire situation could have been avoided if you had just approached me like a normal neighbor." Patricia's face flushed red again. "I do not have to explain myself to you," she snapped. "I was protecting this community." "You were harassing an innocent person," Emma replied firmly. "And now you are going to have to face the consequences of your actions." The radio crackled to life. "Unit 247, this is County Records. We have verified the property ownership information you requested. The cabin at 1247 Lakeshore Drive is currently owned by Emma Richardson. The deed was properly filed in March 2023. Officer Martinez looked at Patricia with undisguised disgust. "Ma'am, you have filed a false police report. This woman is the legal owner of this property, and you have wasted valuable police resources on a fabricated complaint." Patricia's world was beginning to crumble around her. Everything she thought she knew about the situation was wrong. Everything she had built her authority on was a lie. But the worst part was yet to come. Officer Martinez closed his notepad and looked directly at Patricia. His expression had shifted from professional patience to barely contained frustration. "Ma'am, I need to be very clear with you about what has happened here today," he said. "You have filed a false police report claiming that Ms. Richardson was trespassing on this property. We have now verified that she is, in fact, the legal owner of this property. This means that you have wasted police resources and potentially committed a crime." Patricia felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. This was not how this was supposed to go. She was supposed to be the hero of this story, the concerned neighbor who had protected the community from a criminal. Instead, she was being treated like the criminal herself. "I was just trying to protect the neighborhood," Patricia said, her voice becoming shrill. "I thought she was trespassing. I made an honest mistake." Officer Johnson looked at her skeptically. "Did you attempt to verify the ownership of this property before calling the police?" Patricia's silence was answer enough. "Did you attempt to speak with any other neighbors who might know the Richardson family?" Again, Patricia said nothing. "Did you try to contact the property owner or any family members before assuming that Ms. Richardson was trespassing?" Patricia was beginning to realize that she had no good answers to these questions. She had acted on pure assumption and prejudice, without doing any actual investigation. Emma had been listening to this exchange with growing anger. She had been patient and professional throughout this entire ordeal, but she was reaching her breaking point. "Officer Martinez," Emma said, "I would like to know what my options are for dealing with this harassment." "What do you mean?" Officer Martinez asked. Emma pulled out her phone and showed him a series of text messages and emails. "This woman has been harassing my family for months. She has been sending threatening letters, taking photos of our property without permission, and intimidating our guests. Today's incident is just the latest in a long pattern of harassment." Officer Martinez examined Emma's phone, scrolling through months of documented harassment. His expression grew more serious as he read Patricia's increasingly aggressive messages. "Ms. Richardson, have you documented all of these incidents?" "Yes," Emma replied. "I have kept copies of every letter, every email, and every photograph. I also have witnesses who can testify to her harassment of other family members." Patricia watched in horror as Emma presented a detailed case against her. She had thought that her letters and complaints were within her rights as a concerned neighbor. She had never considered that her behavior might be considered harassment. "I was just trying to enforce the HOA rules," Patricia said desperately. "I have the right to report violations." Officer Martinez looked at her with disgust. "Ma'am, you do not have the right to harass people or to file false police reports. And based on what I am seeing here, it appears that you have been engaging in a pattern of harassment against this family." Emma felt a surge of vindication. For months, she had been dealing with Patricia's harassment alone, trying to handle the situation diplomatically. Now, finally, someone in authority was seeing the truth of what had been happening. "I would like to file a formal complaint against her," Emma said. "I want this harassment to stop, and I want her to face consequences for her actions." Officer Martinez nodded. "We can definitely help you with that. Based on what I have seen today, there are several charges that could be filed against Ms. Patricia." Patricia's face went white. "Charges? What charges?" "Filing a false police report is a misdemeanor," Officer Martinez explained. "Harassment is also a misdemeanor, and if we can prove that you have been stalking or intimidating Ms. Richardson, there could be additional charges." Patricia felt her world collapsing around her. She had never imagined that her efforts to maintain community standards could result in criminal charges against her. "I never meant for any of this to happen," Patricia said, her voice beginning to crack. "I was just trying to protect the neighborhood." Emma looked at her with a mixture of pity and anger. "You were not protecting anyone. You were bullying people and making their lives miserable. You have been harassing my family for months, and today you tried to have me arrested for being on my own property." Officer Johnson had been taking notes throughout this entire exchange. "Ms. Richardson, we will need you to come to the station to file a formal complaint. We will also need copies of all the documentation you have regarding the harassment." Emma nodded. "I will be happy to provide whatever you need." Patricia made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "Wait, please. I think there has been a misunderstanding. I am willing to apologize and to leave the Richardson family alone. Can we not just forget about this whole thing?" Officer Martinez looked at her with contempt. "Ma'am, you filed a false police report. You cannot just apologize and make that go away." Emma looked at Patricia with steel in her eyes. "You have been making my family's life hell for months. You have intimidated my elderly relatives, harassed my guests, and tried to have me arrested on my own property. An apology is not going to fix what you have done." Patricia realized that she was facing serious consequences for her actions. The authority that she had assumed she possessed was completely imaginary. The power that she had wielded over her neighbors was about to be turned against her. As the officers prepared to leave, Emma made one final statement that would haunt Patricia for months to come. "I'm not just going to file criminal charges against you," Emma said. "I am also going to sue you for harassment, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. And I am going to make sure that the HOA board knows exactly what kind of person they have been allowing to represent them." Patricia watched as her carefully constructed world crumbled into dust. She had gone from being the self-appointed protector of the community to being a criminal defendant in the space of a single morning. And the worst part was that she had brought it all on herself. The weeks following the incident at the lake cabin were a whirlwind of legal action and community reckoning. Emma followed through on every promise she had made to Patricia that day, and the consequences were swift and severe. Within 48 hours of the police incident, Emma had filed a formal complaint with the district attorney's office. Patricia was charged with filing a false police report, harassment, and stalking. Each charge carried the possibility of jail time and substantial fines. But Emma was not finished. She also filed a civil lawsuit against Patricia for harassment, defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and violation of privacy. The lawsuit sought both monetary damages and a permanent restraining order that would prevent Patricia from coming within 500 feet of any Richardson family member or their property. The legal documents were served to Patricia on a Tuesday morning while she was walking her dog around the neighborhood. The process server found her carrying her usual clipboard, taking notes on her neighbor's landscaping choices. The irony was not lost on anyone in the community. Patricia's first instinct was to fight the charges. She hired an attorney and attempted to argue that she had been acting in good faith as a concerned neighbor. But her defense crumbled when Emma's lawyer presented months of documented harassment, including threatening letters, unauthorized photographs, and witness statements from other neighbors who had been targeted by Patricia's campaigns. The most damaging evidence came from Patricia's own words. Her letters and emails revealed a pattern of escalating aggression and a complete disregard for actual facts or property rights. Her threat to teach a lesson to Emma, documented in her own handwriting, proved that her actions were motivated by malice rather than legitimate concern. As word of the legal action spread through the community, other victims of Patricia's harassment began to come forward. The Johnsons, the Martinez family, the Hendersons, and several other neighbors contacted Emma's lawyer to share their own experiences with Patricia's reign of terror. The HOA board, faced with mounting evidence of Patricia's abuse of authority, launched their own investigation. They discovered that Patricia had been making up rules and regulations, claiming authority that she did not possess, and using HOA letterhead to send threatening letters to neighbors. The board's investigation revealed that Patricia had never actually been appointed to any official position within the HOA. She had simply declared herself the compliance officer and had been acting without any authorization from the board. Her entire campaign of harassment had been based on imaginary authority. The HOA board immediately issued a formal statement disavowing Patricia's actions and clarifying that she had no authority to enforce any rules or regulations. They also implemented new policies to prevent similar abuse in the future and issued formal apologies to all of Patricia's victims. Patricia's legal troubles mounted as more evidence came to light. The district attorney's office discovered that she had filed false reports with other agencies as well, including the county zoning office and the state environmental protection agency. Each false report constituted a separate criminal charge. Faced with overwhelming evidence and mounting legal costs, Patricia eventually agreed to a plea bargain. She pleaded guilty to 3 misdemeanor charges and was sentenced to 6 months of probation, 100 hours of community service, and a substantial fine. She was also required to attend anger management classes and was prohibited from holding any position of authority within the HOA. The civil lawsuit was settled out of court for a significant monetary amount that Emma donated to a local charity that provided legal aid to victims of harassment. More importantly, the settlement included a permanent restraining order that prohibited Patricia from having any contact with the Richardson family. Patricia's house went up for sale within a month of the legal settlement. She could no longer face the daily humiliation of living in a community where everyone knew about her spectacular downfall. The neighbors who had once feared her now looked at her with a mixture of pity and contempt. The sale of Patricia's house was completed quickly, and she moved to a different state where she could start over without the burden of her reputation. But the legal consequences would follow her for years to come, as the criminal charges remained on her record, and the civil judgment was a matter of public record. Emma returned to her peaceful enjoyment of the lake cabin, but the experience had changed her perspective on the importance of standing up to bullies. She used her legal expertise to help other victims of HOA harassment and became an advocate for homeowners' rights. The Richardson family resumed their traditional gatherings at the lake cabin, but they were now more aware of the importance of documenting any harassment or intimidation they might face. They also made a point of getting to know their